Hi everyone, I'm Sunny and today's video will be about Neptune in the, I was going to say the fifth house, the fourth house, I'm sorry, or if you have Neptune in Cancer, this would relate to you. So if you guys have this placement, you're going to notice that it's interesting because it's a water placement in a water house. So it's going to be a very emotional space when it comes to, well, the house, the home, the homeland will be a very emotional space for you. Whether it's positive or negative, only you would decide, and you could even feel both extremes of the good and the bad and the stable. Not in extremes of like Pluto, because that is a watery sign, but it's different in the sense where you kind of might blur the lines when it comes to comforts or what it is, not like seeing things clearly when it comes to what was really going on in the home, right? In the home section. So you could remember it, for example, you could remember it in an aspect where it's through rose colored glasses that, oh, it's a very romanticized version of what you remember, like a movie where it's like, oh, I remember this, like, oh, they fell in love and yada yada. Well, this is similar. It's like, yeah, I mean, you could have had love for the house itself and maybe the memories that were built in there, like maybe your decorations, for example, that you're very creative, and in Christmas season or in summers and Halloweens and Easters and New Year's, that like you did have good memories built in that, but maybe the memories were cut off. You only kept the good things, not the bad things, for example. It's like, well, you did have a lovely place, not saying it had to be super extravagant, but just it was a very homely space, very safe space, quote unquote, right? And you omitted the parts that might have been like you were alone. You were alone at the house most of the time because people could have been working, people could have just been out like doing their own thing. It's not that they didn't want to spend time with you, for example. It's just that maybe the home could have, quote unquote, taken care of itself in that way. It's like, oh, well, that's happening. Like, I guess people might see it as a place where, like, well, it'll just kind of take care of itself on its own. So maybe because you were there, you're the person that kind of might have, I keep saying those terrible words, but you might have been the person to actually maybe fix up the house a bit or just made it feel like at home, or you might have made it feel like you I don't want to say you gave an F, but maybe you're the only person who did give an F about that place. And that's why people remember it like, oh, I mean, it's always going to be there. It's like they take advantage of the fact that maybe you were there and the fact that that place was always there to fall back to. And maybe you could have also had that memory built in, like you could fall back into that place. Maybe you didn't necessarily make it homey and somebody else could have done that. Maybe it was a mother. um, it feels very much like that place is always a place people go back to fall back on when they have hard times or when they have nowhere else to go. It's like that safe haven to some extent, or where it's the home, but it's safe because it's always been there. It's something that it feels more like many people can go into and just feel like a rescue center. Like maybe even at that, you could have been the person who rescues strays and stuff, and you bring them in because they needed a little bit of care and nurturing and tending to, and then they kind of go on their own way, or they maybe stick around. um, it's like a vagabondy type of energy that I feel, but it is interesting that you have a deep placement, like a deep water placement in a water house. So there is a strong connection, a strong emotional connection when it comes to this, however you see it. There could be times throughout your life where you see this as a good thing, and then there's other times where you're like, you want nothing to do with it, you want to disassociate because it's not necessarily that you had the worst memories, but it has painful memories that just, it can make you sad thinking about it, or it makes you homesick or missing something that you never had, for example. It's just the illusion of something that was there but never was, or the disillusion that you start growing into because it's not really the place you thought of it as a kid. I think everyone goes through this where you basically, it's not that you're enamored with your memories, but you make them better in your head than they actually are. Imagining yourself like saying, well, when I was younger, I used to spend like this time, example, like Christmas time with the grandparents, for example, and stuff. And it was great. We had a lot of fun, and I spent all my time there. But maybe it's just that you were the person helping out the grandparents to take care of them, to help them around the house. Maybe it was like you're the grandchild who was very loving and sacrificing, but like in the sense where you did maybe a lot of work just to, keep them happy, or maybe you just helped around a lot when you didn't need to necessarily be parental to like basically say it towards them, because it wasn't really your job but people put you there because you enjoyed taking care of your grandparents. You maybe enjoyed being around them, for example. This doesn't mean that your grandparents could have been terrible, but for example, it's just saying that you were the go-to person to be like, oh, send them, because they know what they're doing. They like spending time with them. They like taking care of them. They like doing stuff for them, like mowing the lawn or whatever. So it's like doing errands for free, or doing things, laborious things that maybe weren't such a big deal to you, but now that you're older, where you're like, oh, I see where the adults might have failed you to some extent. For example, when it comes to taking care of the less fortunate or the needy, it could be like that, but it's just because you do it out of the kindness of your heart and compassion and your love. You don't see it that way, and maybe that's why you romanticize that when you start thinking about these memories from like way back then, and that's why you might have a close, fond, like special place when it comes to the homeland or the home or how you grew up. So it could be like that, and maybe you start growing out of that disillusion because it's like, well, you really saw through the people as you got older and you experienced life, and you maybe ended up in positions close to those that you grew up with, that basically made you open your eyes about how things were really placed, right? So whether this is a good aspect or a bad aspect, it's totally up to you how you see things into perspective. So do keep that in mind, that it can be a very touching place to think about. So some of the things that you can see is that the mother could have also seen things like that, or maybe people took advantage of that kindness and compassionate heart your mother had, or whoever was your female guardian, or even like aunts and grandmothers, and just female roles, just nurturing roles, but specifically more than likely mom, or maybe your older sister. But it feels like they really took advantage of that, because it was like they knew, typically it's always family who knows, like they're always someone they can rely on. So your mother figure could have always been the one they went to as a fallback, and because of that, I think she could have also experienced this just as much as you could. You could experience poor mental health, or your mental health is not that great and you might not know why. I think it might take you a very long time to decipher what's really eating at you, because something's up and something's eating at the back of your head, but you don't know how to address it or where to start. It's like you might sorry, my throat's going out. You might also realize that apologies. You might also realize that maybe you might know something's not right, but just because you continue to see the problem, you don't know how to do patterns that are not the same. It's like you don't know how to do anything else besides that. So you might continuously be in cycles that are not favorable to you, where you basically get taken advantage of. You're always in it, most likely at a disadvantage, and maybe the mother is too. And depending on people's free, how do I say it? Not necessarily free money, but like handouts. There you go. So maybe like food stamps, or maybe resources, like anything that's material, that's like someone's nice enough and kind enough to give it to you because they wanted to, or because they felt like you needed it more than they did. It can be like that, where you're kind of living in poverty too for a while, or being homeless too. It's another factor that you might notice and experience from time to time, and it might bring up that poor mental health also from time to time, because you start remembering or realizing that there's certain habits that you're trying to get out of, but unfortunately the circumstances are out of your hands. It's not something that you purposely might have brought yourself all the time into, but rather those circumstances just pushed you into them. Like, example, that 2020 thing everyone went through, that home environment was kind of difficult because everybody went through it, and they experienced what it was like to be limited, to basically stay in one place, right? You could have experienced that, an example like that, heavier, where you're like, well, I have to stay in one place, but I can't. I have to constantly be moving, and it's difficult, but it's out of my hands. It's this circumstances that it affects. It's a generational planet that affects everybody. So you see it, but you just don't know how to easily see through it, because it's a very confusing planet. It's a very confusing energy, but it is workable with, right? But it will take you a very long time to decipher those qualities, because you have to realize how to work with it before you actually get to surpass it. It's not always, it's not like a super, it's not a super challenging aspect for everybody. It's just very blurry and ethereal and confusing, and just, it has a lot to do with boundaries and knowing what's the correct thing to do, what's not the correct thing to do, how you can put past certain things about not having others pass those boundaries of, like, if I need to do something, I need to do it my way and not your way. Like acquiring home, for example, like the home environment can be tricky, and so you might have to rely on certain assistances, home assistance stuff, programs, to get that home, right? That home environment you wish to have. That's like your own little place, even if it's small, but it might take you a long time because others might be like, well, this is the right way to go, or why don't you try this? And you kind of try all these things, and maybe sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and they might not be always for the long term. So you're gonna have to struggle to kind of stand on your own 2 feet and not rely on others and others' help for a good while before you figure out how to do it the right way, because you put up your boundaries of, look, thank you, but this is not always the best way to handle it, right? So that can be some examples, not for everybody. And going back to the mother, because I completely got sidetracked with other things. Your mother can have her own inner mental health struggles, and maybe that can be passed on to you. The lineage, there you go. The lineage can be tricky, because sometimes it's one of those things that you end up, what's it called? Not acquiring, what's that word? You end up, wow, I can't think of the word, I just had it. Inheriting, there you go. You end up inheriting certain traits like that can be tricky, and it might not be the easiest to handle, like I said before. So it's one of those things that when you start feeling those transits heavier, you're gonna do your best to navigate them, but you're gonna be very confused, because you're gonna be like, what, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? Should I go this way? Should I go that way? Should I listen to them, or should I listen to my inner voice? There's an intuitive feeling that you're gonna have to kind of fight and struggle, because rationale and your inner little voice from your heart, from your mind, from your soul, is gonna fight you. So do keep that in mind, that it's gonna be a very slow like thinking process, right? That you're gonna figure out eventually. And the same could be for the mother. It's not always something that can be figured out in this lifetime, but maybe the next generation and so on can be the people who break the cycles, for example. So that could be something to consider. My throat is going out, I'm sorry. I'm taking a little break. So moving on to some other things. your heritage. I'm pretty sure towards like the end of the video my voice is gonna start cracking, so I apologize. But I do think that you could have blurriness when it comes to even your heritage, or if you didn't know your mother because they were out of your life. It could have been in mental health facilities, or like, what are they called, elderly care centers, and you didn't see her often, or they just lived at a distance, for example, or they were in and out of jail, prisons, maybe halfway houses. These are some examples. I'm going lower, I'm sorry, but my voice is going terrible. But she might not have that contact that you might wish to have, or maybe even that you might not know who your mother is, because maybe she had passed you down to one of your other members in the family and somebody else was taking care of you, or maybe you were passed down the system, or maybe they gave you up for adoption, for their own personal reasons, and there's a void in that not knowing who she was, and imagining her to be a certain way, and maybe not being able to ever experience that yourself the way you wanted it to, or meeting her and being disillusioned with the fact that she was not all that you led her up to be in your head. Or you can also have her pass on, right, and not have that close experience because she was always sick, or because she was elderly. So it could be some of those scenarios where you might have not known who she was, and it kind of brings up an issue internally that you always wonder who you came from. So molding yourself to be wherever you are in your environment is something that you might fall into, and you might struggle to actually find yourself, like who you are to the world, basically. So the missing mother can be like a link of that. You might notice that it might trigger who you are and who you're not to the world, because she should have played or did play a part into that integration between you and your surroundings. So it can be one of those things that could be sensitive to you, not knowing where you came from, but you just kind of adjust yourself to whoever you are with, what you consider family is something that's kind of, eventually you might like be okay with it and like romanticize it, like, oh, I can be a new person every day, like not every day, but like I can surround myself with the people that I like. I can pick and choose, kind of thing. And many people might end up caring for you in that role. So do keep that in mind. Even that, well, I'll probably write more because I think I spent too much time on other things that I wanted to say, but it's okay, I'll keep writing. So on a final note, I do think that you would likely end up being more comfortable in locations that are surrounded by water or by the sea, or even at that, there could be an aversion to it because you might fear it, because it could trigger certain phobias and stuff. Neptune is also a planet of fears, and you might fear a lot of things, or a lot of just being in just one location, even at that, could be causing you fears because it gives you anxious feelings because you never really dealt with being stagnant. You're always moving and going, and no one can really catch you. It's like you're always hiding away. Like people see you and then people don't see you. You're very public about the places that you're in, but then you go and hide and don't show off, like through pictures and stuff, for example. So it could be one of those things that you're always in a new place every time people see you, and you can even experience that you might feel more comfortable in those scenarios, right? So do keep that in mind. I think a lot of these places could be very pretty and picturesque too, and you might enjoy taking pictures of these places as like good memories that you build up on. So maybe that's why you might romanticize the homeland, the home section, the mother, because you continuously continue to collect memories and little mementos of the places that you've been, because you never had a solid place and foundation to rely on. You always had to rely on others to help you mold that soft, comfortable environment that would make you feel safe and comfortable and warm and fuzzy. And you kind of have to adapt with the changes, constantly moving and like meeting many people that could be for your benefit or for your no benefit. I couldn't find the word, but basically not everyone's gonna help you out. Sometimes they might take your resources and basically leave you penniless and homeless, right? So you fill in the blanks as to the types of scenarios that I'm trying to say, where people might take advantage of you because you could be the person that pays the bills, and they kind of try to make a smart move on you to basically push you out because they want to push somebody in. And you're like, I have nowhere to go. So you're like crashing in your car, for example, for a while. So it could be one of the scenarios, right? So there's so many scenarios that this can be where you end up being homeless because of circumstances outside or because of certain DRUG addictions or substances, right? That can play a big role too. Or you could have experienced that with your mother too, of seeing that and maybe picking up those habits that you're trying to break later on, right? So seeing things more clearly without being under the influence of things and romanticizing things that really weren't there, right? So thank you guys for watching this video, and I will continue to write more notes about this because I think I went off topic for a bit. So thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. So bye everybody.